Good day, dental professionals. Welcome to the Dental Flow podcast. We are dentistry's go-to resource for insights into the business side of dentistry. Your host, Benjamin Suggs, will be helping you navigate through the currents of the ever-changing dental waters. This podcast is packed with innovative practice growth strategies, actionable insights, and expert advice, all tailored to help you elevate your dental practice to the next level. If you're ready to dive in, so are we. Let's get into the flow.
Hello. Welcome back to the Dental Flow podcast. As always, I'm your host, Benjamin Suggs. And today we have a very special guest. Today we're talking to Matt Poppert. He is from DDS Match South. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with DDS Match South, they are a dental practice broker. They operate in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and Northern Florida. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, the Panhandle of Florida.
That Panhandle,
yep.
Absolutely. So that would be like Tallahassee, and how far down is that above Orlando?
From Tallahassee all the way to the west, all the way to the western border there.
Perfect.
Up against Alabama. Yep.
Okay. And what they focus on at DDS Match South is they help doctors who want to sell their dental practice. They can sell to another doctor, to a DSO. They help doctors who are looking to add associates to their practice or looking for partners to join their practice. And they also help associates or younger dentists who are looking to buy practices find really good practices to purchase. So Matt, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So Matt, tell us a little bit about your background. So I know you've been in the dental industry for a long time, and even before that, tell us how you got to being a dental practice broker.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town, little farm town in Wisconsin, and I think like a lot of people in small towns, I wanted to get out of that small town, and I saw the United States Marine Corps as a way to get out, and I probably needed a swift kick in the rear end back then as well. But I joined the Marine Corps. It's Watertown, small town in between. Yep, right in between Milwaukee and Madison.
Wow.
So I joined the Marine Corps. My first day of boot camp was the first day we started bombing Iraq in the first Desert Storm. So I missed that. That was over before I got out of boot camp, and then ended up getting selected for an anti-terror security unit. Served a year and a half in Yokosuka, Japan, with that's where the 7th Fleet is headquartered out of, and then rotated back to the States into a amphibious small boat assault company. That was early in 93, and then Black Hawk Down happened in October of 93, and we shortly thereafter got orders and spent 6 months in East Africa, in Mogadishu, and then came back and decided to go to college. Went to school back in Wisconsin and got very fortunate, ended up with a company that manufactured defibrillators in the late 90s, where right about then is when in the dental world, conscious sedation was becoming a kind of a mainstream thing in dental practices, and defibrillators and vital signs monitors became a must in those scenarios. So our company actually got bought by Welsh Allen, which is a large medical equipment company that's now, I think, owned by Hillbrand. But anyway, they said, hey, we think we can sell these things to dentists. And to be honest with you, at the time, I didn't even know how to spell dental. But I hired an independent sales force and spent 3 years selling defibrillators and other small medical equipment to dentists, and then became just a territory rep. I got burnt out flying from one side of the country to the other. And an independent rep that I'd hired was retiring, and I took over his book of business. And I spent about 15 years as a manufacturer's rep in the dental business, selling dental equipment, helping doctors design and start dental practices, working with the distribution channel, the dental distribution channel, for all those years. And then went back to school and got my MBA back in 2010. And after that, got the entrepreneurial itch and left the dental manufacturing world and started dabbling in dental real estate and helping doctors negotiate leases, again, more on the startup side, but would get involved with transitions from time to time where a doctor was buying another doctor's practice and there was a lease in place, or the seller of the practice owned the real estate, and I'd get brought in to help put together a real estate transaction to buy it. And one of the things I noticed was just that there wasn't a whole lot of structure. It wasn't a very sophisticated process. It was very back of the napkin type of math that was being done. And with DSOs becoming pretty big, this was back in like 2014. You saw these folks that are professional buyers really kind of taking advantage of dentists, in my opinion. And at the time, Thad Miller was kind of had DDS Match up and running at that point. And then he decided to franchise the country. So I partnered up with Ryan Prod, who he had been working for Bank of America at the time. So we worked on a lot of transactions together. And we bought the franchises for DDS Match for Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and then the Panhandle of Florida. So that's kind of my migration from, kind of extreme, right? Going from the Marine Corps and being a grunt, and now in this world of helping doctors transition their practices.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I think it's important to point out too that this is what you do full time, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there in this industry who dabble in dental practice brokering while they're also doing another full time job. But you guys are all in on this every day.
Yeah, that's correct. And Ryan and I combine probably transact between 28 and 35 times a year. So, we're transacting at a very, very high level. We own the business. And like you said, this is our only stream of revenue. This is where we make our money. This is what we do all day, every day. And at any given time, we can be managing, 15 to 30 different transactions at the same time.
Wow, that's a lot. That's impressive. So let me ask you this question. So, I do dental marketing, and when I'm talking to my clients, I often get that question of, hey, I'm kind of thinking that I want to move to the next step of maybe selling my practice. How does that affect the number of patients we're getting? But I notice whenever they say this to me, they immediately say, hey, don't tell anybody about that. Don't tell anybody what I just told you. So, how important is that confidentiality in this process when a doctor approaches you about potentially selling their practice, given that it can be, an 8 month to a year process, or however long it takes?
Yeah, confidentiality is of the utmost importance. And the reason being is that if the word gets out and patients start to hear that, Dr. Jones, who's been their doctor for 30 years, is thinking about retiring, that patient may use that as an excuse to go find a different dentist. And in their mind, they're thinking, hey, if I got to see a new dentist, then, I might as well just go somewhere else. So you start to see some patient attrition. You can see patient attrition, which obviously patient attrition is going to affect the revenue numbers. And if the revenue numbers are declining, that's going to be a red flag for a buyer. The other aspect of it from a confidentiality standpoint is people get nervous when there's change. And, the difficult thing, this is a very, staff to a doctor is usually family. And a lot of times doctors feel guilty about, I feel like I need to tell my staff, I need to bring my staff into this. And our advice is that, one, when they sign up with us, they have to sign a confidentiality agreement. When they sign a letter of intent from a buyer, there's going to be confidentiality tied to that as well. But the analogy that I like to use is that, Ben, you've got kids, and if you decided to pick up and move from where you are to another town, you're not going to go to your 12-year-old daughter and say, hey, are you okay with us picking up and moving? You've got to make that decision for your family because you know what's best for you and your family. And this is kind of a similar type of a situation. And again, if you think about, if staff finds out, again, people get nervous, and if all of a sudden your hygienist leaves, then there's concern from buyers around, if that hygienist went to go work for the doctor up the street, then, our patient's going to follow her to, or that person to the other practice. And then also there's some doctors that would take advantage of the fact if they knew that the guy down the street or the lady down the street was selling their practice and try to pirate staff. And if you start losing staff during a transition, it can post COVID, we see a little bit more, not because of the confidentiality, but just it seems to be a little bit more transitional. But the more confidentiality we have around it, the better the transaction goes. It's
Yeah.
very important though.
It really is. I mean, I from my own business side, like years ago after COVID, once we saw that everything could come to a grinding halt, we got a business line of credit so that we would just have that there if we needed it. And now to this day, 4 years later, twice a day, I get blown up by lenders trying to sell us another line of credit. It's like our information got out there and it's become a nuisance. They're calling the business line, calling my cell phone. So yeah, I think that is what y'all are doing. The way you approach it is so important that, the doctor doesn't have to worry about all of a sudden someone's calling his practice every day asking about if he wants to sell a practice.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So, you hear a lot, and I think we've even mentioned DSOs already, but, if you look at, if you're in the industry like we are, you see a lot of doom and gloom scenarios of, corporate dentistry is taking over everything and they're going to own 80% of all dental practices in a few years. And I think a lot of dentists are hearing that and thinking that, okay, so my option is to only sell to a DSO. Is that really the case that you're seeing in the marketplace?
So it's not. I think the DSOs have put a lot of propaganda out there, and use it as a tactic to try to convince doctors to sell, and they'll come in and say, hey, these young doctors aren't entrepreneurial, or the banks aren't going to lend them the money because the cost of dental school has gone up and they've got $350,000 to $400,000 of student debt. And quite honestly, they'll go into the dental schools and try to again use propaganda as to why they're going to need to come to work for them and that they're buying everything and we're their only option. But the reality is, I can tell you our personal statistics. So we've been involved in selling over 150 dental practices, and statistically our numbers fall in line kind of with what we see the averages are that are out there, which are about 70 to 75% of the practices we sell, we do doc to doc deals.
Wow.
And the other 25 to 30% are DSOs. And if you dig deeper into those numbers, it's usually, the doctor that's at near or at retirement age is typically, they don't, DSO structures have changed quite a bit, and now they want a commitment of 5 years. If you sell, well, if a doctor's 62 or 65 and they're ready to sell, they don't want to work for somebody for another 5 years. They'd like to typically get their money and, get to the beach. So yeah, and the reality is that there are buyers all over the place. I listed a practice on the north side of Atlanta last Friday. I had 48 inquiries by Sunday morning, and today's Thursday. I've probably spoke to 55 to 60 doctors about that one practice. So
Wow.
there's plenty of buyers out there. The banks are more than willing to lend 100% of the purchase price. So doctors, these young doctors want to own. They want to own more than they want to associate. So the answer to the question is no. Now, is there a place for DSOs? Absolutely. Like I said, we sell 30% of our practices to DSOs, but what we find is it's typically the doctor that's maybe in their 40s or 50s, and they've built an incredibly strong platform. They maybe don't want to have the grind of running and maintaining the business, or it's grown to a point where they can't grow it anymore, and they want to be able to take advantage of some of those economics that a DSO can offer for them to be able to benefit financially even more down the road. So there's good groups out there and there's bad groups out there, just like there's good buyers and there's bad buyers and good sellers and bad sellers. But the reality is our approach is to really try to figure out and understand what is the goal of the seller. And then from there, be able to guide them and say, the path of the DSO might be the right path for you, or the private buyers definitely. But I think the biggest thing in this part of the conversation here is for sellers to understand that they have options. They don't have to sell to a DSO. The private buyers are out there.
Yeah, that's huge. Just to having the choice, I think, would make people more comfortable to start the process. So that's good to
Yeah.
hear that there's a mix. And I think, I don't want to not bad mouthing corporate dentistry, because there's a place for it for sure, like you said. So it's good to know that there's a nice mix out there, that people have options. So I know you guys, I've seen on your website and on your social media that you guys do a lot of, general practices, pediatric practices. Do you work with all types of specialty practices? Can you basically sell any type of dental practice?
Yes, we do, and we can. There's different, obviously the metrics are different for an endo practice than they are for a general practice, and an oral surgery practice to a pros practice. But yes, we sell across the board. The majority of what we do, the majority of what any broker is going to do is GP, just because the numbers are so much stronger on that side. There's just a lot more of them out there. But every year we have a number of specialty practices. We've sold in every vertical, uh, and the buyers in all of those verticals are strong. Process is essentially the same, just a different set of buyers.
Awesome, get it. And are there corporates that buy specialty practices as well, or do they generally focus on your general family type practice?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There are specialty DSOs out there that all they
Wow.
buy are specialty DSOs, and then we're also seeing now that some of these large GP DSO platforms have gotten to the point where they realize they're referring out hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of specialty work. So they're now, not all of them, but some of them now are um, coming in and buying specialists strategically within different markets, so that they've got a built in referral base to keep some of that revenue in house as well.
So if their practice they own is referring out to a periodontist, they own the periodontist practice as well. Got it. Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes.
it just keeps it all in house. Yeah.
Yeah, I think every dentist, whether corporate or non-corporate, dentist owned, they look at their books every every year and see how much is being referred out, and think about how can we bring that back in. So that makes total sense.
Yep.
Um, so given you've been doing this for a long time, like what's the most common misconception that dentists have when it comes to selling a dental practice?
Yeah, I think the most common is that the way most baby boomers came into the market, and came into ownership, is they came out of dental school and either just hung a shingle and started their practice, or they went to a older dentist, a more established dentist, and a dentist said, "Hey, here's a chair. Build the practice and within my practice as an associate, and then someday I'll let you buy my practice out."
Mhm.
And that model, or that way of transitioning, um, I'm not going to say it's gone the way of the dinosaur, but it's getting harder and harder to do it. And there's a lot of dynamics that have changed. For example, when those baby boomers were coming out of dental school, there were no such things as a DSO. They didn't have any other options. And today, a lot of these doctors, I think, coming out of Augusta, it's like 80% of them end up going to work for a DSO for a year or two.
Wow.
So they come out, they're in a scenario where the company is putting patients in chairs for them, and they're just asked to do dentistry. So the good news for those associates is their hand speed is going to get quick. They're going to be doing a lot of dentistry. A lot of times they are getting some good mentorship. But when they come out of that, and usually after a year or two, the younger doctors say, "Hey, this may not be what I signed up for, and I want to take a look at private practice dentistry." But in their mind, they've been given a daily guarantee while they were there, and most of them are out producing that at that point. And then an independent doctor, a private practice doctor, wants to come and hire them. And if they don't have the patient base to be able to support the income that that doctor had been making, that's where it can struggle just getting them into the practice. But let's say they've got the patient flow to get the associate in there and keep their income up. The challenges that we see is that a lot of times how the practice is going to be valued is never communicated, or if it's communicated, it's never executed on properly, and timeframes are never really discussed. There's not a procedure or a process put into place to say, hey, here's how we're going to get from you being an associate today to someday being in ownership. And I would say that a very high percentage of the buyers we end up working with had been in a scenario where they were an associate and thought they were going to buy in. And from their perception, they feel like they got burned. And now they just want to own outright. So, and then on the flip side, I've got sellers that thought they had a built-in buyer, and for whatever reason, the buyer didn't execute. And then they're in a position where they just have to sell the practice. But that associate to ownership role has become a much more difficult. I would say that if there's 10 of those out there, maybe one or two of them actually transact. And a lot of times, and this is kind of a misconception as well, that goes hand in hand, is the doctors think they can do it themselves. And the reality is you need a professional that does this on a daily basis that can help manage the emotions, manage the process to make sure that it's effective, because it's expensive for a seller if they don't execute on it. And for the buyer, they may have wasted 2, 3, 4 years in a practice thinking they were going to be an owner that it ends up not working out. So it ends up costing on both sides if it doesn't transact properly, or if it doesn't close.
Yeah, I definitely, from our perspective, we see a lot of movement from associates where, a client calls and says, hey, add this associate to the website, and then 3 months later, take them off. And, it does seem like there's a lot of movement and not a lot of stickiness, unless cases where we have a doctor who's opening a second location or a third location. It's a perfect fit for an associate to go in there and hit the ground running. But that's usually a call we get when they're hiring an associate and they say, we really need to pump up our numbers because we need enough patients that we both can be busy all day. So I could see how that could be a challenge.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is you'll see the doctor that's collecting $1 million, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to bring this associate in, and eventually I'd like him to take it over. But then when you get down to the economics of it, they don't want to take a pay cut.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to pass their patient base over to them right away. But then that associate has to make, $150,000 a year to keep up with their expenses and debt and whatnot that they have. And that's where you see those doctors will be there for 3 or 4 months. They're not making any money. They're not getting the patients that they thought they'd get. So they're just hiring an associate in general is just a conversation of a whole nother conversation. We could spend another 20 minutes talking about how to properly, put that together.
Awesome. And you guys, and just to note, you guys do help with that as well. Like
we do. Yep.
Yeah. You help. And I guess it's the name of the company, Match, DDS Match. I mean, you guys really take the time to match the right type of associate with an owner, not just any associate with an owner, to try and increase the probability, the likelihood that it works.
Yeah, both with the associate and the buyer. It's when we're looking at transitions, one of the things I like to talk to the sellers about is, we're not just going to put warm bodies in front of you. We're going to try and put the right people in front of you. And I'm not the one to decide that, hey, Bob is the right person to buy this practice. Ultimately, it's the seller's decision on who the right person is. But we go through a screening process to make sure that the people we're putting in front of them are qualified and from a fairly high level, a good match. What I like to tell my clients is if we get to the end of the interview process of buyers and you've got 3 letters of intent and you're not sure which doctor to execute with, then I've done my job. I want them to have a tough decision as to who it is that they should be transacting with.
Fantastic. And so just real quick to wrap that part up, do you see a lot, I mean, when you're matching associates and doctors, are they coming from all over, like different states to work? I mean, it's not just people in your state. Like you can actually have associates move there to come work with you. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's absolutely correct. And we really saw it heat up post COVID. So many people are coming from the left coast, Washington, Oregon, California. And so yeah, we see a lot coming from out west in the winter. Every time there's a big blizzard in New York or Michigan or Chicago, our phone starts ringing.
Yeah.
People are tired of the winters and want to come down here to the Southeast. And it's interesting when I talk to my counterparts. So DDS Match is a national company. And one of the benefits of that is we have access to all those buyers and associates that are out on the West Coast and up in New York and in the Midwest that are trying to get down here. It allows us to cast a very, very wide net. But talking to brokers in states like New York and California, they have a harder time when we kind of comparing notes on, hey, in this type of a market, how many buyers would you get versus what they get? And they're still transacting at a pretty high level, but the activity of buyers that we get in the Southeast is much higher due to people wanting to be here. And again, I believe it's due to the network that we have where we pull nationally.
And you find those people looking for cost of living and better climate to live in for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what would you say? So if I'm a dentist and I am starting that process of wanting to, even if it's, I want to sell my practice in 2 years or whatever the timeline is. So what are the top 3 things that I should do as that dentist to start preparing for this eventual transaction?
Yeah, so probably the most important thing is maintaining or growing revenues. One thing that banks and buyers CPAs are going to pop little red flags up is if you've got declining revenues. So we look at kind of the life cycle of a practice where a young doctor either starts up or buys, and we see some pretty tremendous growth over an 8 to 10 year period, and then as that doctor's got younger kids getting involved in soccer and football and volleyball, and they're going to more things and they get comfortable, and it kind of plateaus, or it'll that growth slows down. That's fine. But what we don't like to see is when the kids get out of college and the doctor's 58, 59, 60 years old, starting to let those revenues decline. Because when we go to sell the practice, it doesn't, if the practice was doing $1 million 4 years ago and it's doing 600,000 today, that $1 million doesn't matter. What the practice is going to be valued off of is going to be what it's doing in the most current trailing 12 months. Right. That's what it's going to be graded the most heavily on. So, that's the first thing, is focusing on and putting a plan in place to be able to keep those revenues at a minimum consistent. If you have slight growth, that's even better. The second thing is getting your real estate in order. So you're going to have 2 different scenarios with real estate. Either you're in a lease space or you own your real estate. If you're in a lease space, I would tell any doctor at any point that they're negotiating a lease, on the front end, have a dental attorney review that lease. There's language in these leases that can tie you to that lease space literally for a lifetime. If that practice never, I'm dealing with a situation right now where a doctor signed a lease and there's language in the assignment that they will never be released as a guarantor as long as that practice, it could sell 3 times to 3 different doctors over a 20-year period, and they are still a personal guarantor on that space. We see assignment language where it just makes it very, very difficult to assign it. Where if a doctor that's owned a practice for 10 or 15 years moves into a new lease space, there could be language that says that the incoming doctor has to have the same financial strength as the current owner. Well, no 29-year-old dentist is going to have the same financial strength as what a dentist has been practicing for 15 years, right? So things like that become very difficult. And now we're starting to see landlords slip things in where if the practice sells when it's in that lease space, that the landlord will be due a percentage of the sale. So yeah, I've seen where 5 and 10%. So, and
Wow.
these are all things that when I've come across these with tenants, they had no idea it was in there, and they thought, well, I'd got a good relationship with the landlord, and because of that, I assumed that we were cool, and this was going to be easy.
They had my
And
best.
what I like to tell people is, look, landlords are professional business people, and they drive nice cars and have big houses because they're good business people.
Right.
But they're looking out for their best interest, not your best interest. So you spend the couple $1,000 it's going to cost you to have an attorney review. So if you've already signed a lease, there's nothing you can do about it. However, when you go to renew that lease, then you're in a perfect position to start negotiating and maybe get some of that stuff taken out. But you've got to do it ahead of time. You got to start 12 months before your lease ends. You've got leverage at that point, and there's professionals out there that do this for a living, dental tenant rep brokers. And there's, like I said, there's real estate and dental attorneys that can help get that language cleaned up. But getting your lease in order is very, very important. If you own your real estate, it's important prior to getting ready to sell to understand what's the value of my building. If you bought a building in Roswell 20 years ago and you paid $400,000 for that building, or $500,000, and your practice is collecting $800,000, that piece of real estate could be worth, $1.5 million today. The economics of a practice collecting 800 and trying to sell that building to a buyer, it makes it very, very difficult to make those numbers work, right? So knowing and kind of understanding on the front end, hey, how does my real estate fit into my retirement plan? Am I going to continue to own that real estate? Do I want to sell it to the buyer? Do I want to sell it to a REIT before I sell the practice? But if you're doing that, I would highly encourage a seller to sit down with a practice broker, because your rent affects the value of your practice. The higher your rent, the lower the value of your practice. The lower the rent, the higher the value of the practice. And there's a friendly medium there where we can maximize the value of the real estate and the practice. And that's really where we want to try to land, because if you sell that building to an investor and the rent goes up, above market rates to be able to make that deal work, it's going to end up putting a lot of negative financial pressure, downward pressure on the income of that practice, which is going to make it harder to sell.
Right.
So that's very important. And then lastly is, nobody likes to talk about death and disability, and I don't like talking about it either. But being in this business, I'm forced to deal with it 2 to 3 times a year. We got pulled into a situation last year where a 48-year-old doctor had cardiac arrest, completely healthy, spent multiple weeks in a coma, thankfully came out of it, but there was a disability where he can't practice, and we had to sell his practice. And unfortunately, there was not a power of attorney in place. There was a number of things that weren't in place where we had to sit on the sidelines, wait for him to come out of that coma to be able to sign documents to allow the family to be able to pursue and execute on it. When there's a death, a lot of times what happens is obviously the family's in mourning. At some point in that doctor's career, they went to their spouse and said, hey, if I die, don't ever accept less than X for my dental practice.
Right.
The doctor passes away for whatever reason, and then the family mourns, and then a financial planner, a CPA, or an attorney saying, hey, you've got to do something with this asset. Well, for every day a doctor isn't in a dental practice because of a death or a disability, it devalues by about 1.5% a day.
A day.
So if you start a day, and the reason being is patients are going to hear about that, and they've got to go see a dentist, right? So the patients start hemorrhaging out of that practice, and that's where the real value is that reoccurring revenue of those patients continuing to come back. And there's no goodwill. there's no doctor there to pass the goodwill from him to that new buyer. So immediately there's already got to be a discount applied because that buyer is taking a risk, because you've only got, hopefully the staff is going to stay, and that's going to be the only people that are going to be able to transfer the goodwill, which isn't at the same level as what the doctor is. So, we advise getting a valuation done, once every 12 to 24 months, understanding what the value of the practice is, having a conversation with the spouse that, hey, if something happens, here's a business card of somebody, or give this to the attorney, that if something happens, or even put it in the will, that if something happens, that, the CPA needs to be notified, the dental attorney needs to be notified, and this broker needs to be identified to be able to get to work immediately to try to save as much of the value of that practice that can be saved. So those are really kind of the top three things that I would say need to be focused on. We could probably spend a couple hours talking about each one of those in more detail.
And there's probably a lot more too. So, I heard, I know, looking at y'all's website, y'all do valuations for doctors.
Yes. Yep.
So what I'm hearing for a dentist is, if you're thinking about selling your practice in 10 years, you probably should go ahead and contact you guys and get a valuation done now to figure out all those potential issues that are there, so you can start correcting them, fixing them, having your insurance and liability and all that stuff in place. So whether it's 10 years, 5 years, or 2 years, probably should reach out to you guys and get a valuation.
Yeah. It's never too early to start planning. When I was in the Marine Corps, we used to say proper prior planning prevents poor performance. And if in business school, one of the first things they taught me when I went back to get my MBA is, the day you start a business, you should be planning your exit. And I think that that's something that doesn't get done a lot of times in dental practices. Is, they've got a plan for how they're going to start their business and how they're going to grow their business, but the transition part of it, how they're going to exit, their exit strategy, isn't really looked at until sometimes 6 to 12 months before they're ready to walk away.
Right.
So having a conversation 15 years before they're going to sell, 10 years before they're going to sell, just so they simply can understand that, hey, here are the things I need to be paying attention to. Here's what the current value of my practice is, and tuck that away with the will and the other important papers if tragedy strikes. So there's at least a starting point for somebody to be able to jump on that practice and try to retain some of the value for the family after that person passes away or is disabled.
And you guys will coordinate with whoever else needs to be brought in professionally, like attorneys, lease negotiation, all that stuff. You guys have people that you can recommend or work with people in place to help that doctor solve all those problems, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're very well networked in to all the markets that we're in, and have attorneys and tenant rep brokers and dental CPAs, financial planners, all the way across the board. So, and if there's something that somebody needs that we don't have a connection to, we probably know somebody that has somebody that can do that.
Awesome. So, Matt, if I'm a dentist and I'm in Alabama, Georgia, the Florida Panhandle, or Tennessee, and I want to contact you guys to talk about, either just have a conversation or talk about doing one of these practice evaluations, where would I find you guys to discuss with you?
Yeah, so you can find us on social media. DDS Match South is our handle across all the platforms. You can go to ddsmatch.com and scroll down to the states that we're in and find us there. And then we've got a landing page as well that I should know off the top of my head. I think is it ddsmatchsouth.com?
Yeah, ddsmatchsouth.com. Trust me, I did some research on there before we spoke. So.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the places they can find us.
Awesome. And so we'll also include that kind of those things, and also your social media handles in the show notes for this episode. But Matt, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. I know I learned a lot. I hope everyone listening learned a lot. And thank you again.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for joining us for this Dental Flow podcast episode. If you enjoyed today's discussion and wish to stay updated on future episodes, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast with colleagues and friends. For more insights and discussions on dental marketing, we encourage you to continue riding the Dental Flow wave and tune into the next episode. Keep on smiling, learning, and flowing with the Dental Flow podcast.